This interview was never meant to see the light of day, and yet you are reading it now. In 1954, 1 year before his death, Albert Einstein allegedly gave a conversation that was immediately classified. To this day, official science denies the very existence of this interview, but in the 21st century, thanks to the lost archives of one of his closest friends, Dr. Kurt Gödel, these words have resurfaced. This is not just an interview, it is a confession. Reflections of a great mind on what lies beyond the final boundary, beyond death. I know how it sounds. Sensation, legend, forgery. And yet, Gödel's manuscript was discovered in the year 2022 in Princeton, in the double bottom of an old safe. The document began with the words, "These confessions may change humanity or destroy it." The journalist, whose name remains undisclosed, asked the first question. "Professor Einstein, do you believe in the continuation of life after death?" Pause. The document notes, long silence, a slight smile. To believe is not the right word. At my age, I prefer to know. The journalist did not expect such an answer. He continued, "But science, your science, has always denied the existence of the soul." "Not my science," Einstein corrected him. "Science, as understood by the masses, is limited to the observable. It is blind to what does not fit into formulas. And now listen carefully," he added. "What I am about to say must remain between us, at least until humanity is ready. Life does not cease with death. This is not a hypothesis. This is a fact I understood not by studying physics, but by examining the mathematical structures of time and space." The journalist could not believe his ears. "Excuse me, Professor, are you speaking of the soul, of heaven?" "I am speaking of continuation, of transformation. Imagine a wave on the surface of the ocean. As long as there is wind, it exists. But even when the wind stops, the water does not disappear. The wave is no longer visible, but its energy remains in the ocean. Human consciousness is that wave. The body is merely a temporary form in which this wave manifests. When the body dies, consciousness does not cease to exist. It returns to the ocean." It took the journalist several minutes to process what he had heard. But how does this align with the theory of relativity? "Ah," Einstein smiled. "The theory of relativity concerns matter and energy. But another element has always eluded the formulas, the observer. Consciousness itself is not a product of matter, it is primary. The entire universe exists because someone perceives it. This is an ancient truth, intuited by mystics. I arrived at it through mathematics. The double-slit paradox, the entanglement of quantum particles, all this points to one terrifying but beautiful thought. Consciousness shapes reality. And after death, it does not disappear. It returns to the source, to pure perception. And if you ask me whether God exists," the journalist leaned in closer, "I will answer, God is not a person, not a bearded old man on a cloud. God is the ocean itself. The consciousness of all beings merges in this ocean. That is why no one who has ever lived disappears forever. Death is not the end. It is a return home." The journalist raised his eyes from the notebook. Somewhere outside, the wind rumbled dully. The spring of 1954 was cold and restless. "Professor, forgive my bluntness. But how can a scientist of your level assert something so metaphysical?" Einstein leaned forward. His gaze became serious, almost heavy. "You think this is faith? This is knowledge. I have observed patterns. My work on the unified field theory led me to understand there exists a single structure connecting matter, energy, and consciousness. At the beginning of the 20th century, physicists thought the atom was the indivisible brick of reality. But we were mistaken. Beyond the atom lies emptiness, beyond the emptiness vibrations, the hum of the vacuum, and beyond that, Einstein paused. Mind. Are you familiar with the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox? Yes, quantum entanglement. When two particles, once having interacted, remain connected regardless of the distance between them. This is not just physics. It is a hint. Connection is the foundation of existence. If particles can be connected across space, why cannot consciousnesses be connected across death? The journalist swallowed hard. The room noticeably grew colder. Professor, but this means, yes. Einstein nodded. Consciousness is non-local. It is not bound to the brain. The brain is an antenna, a receiver, and the source lies beyond time and space. Death is not the destruction of the antenna. It is merely the disconnection of one channel of communication. But the ether remains, like radio waves that continue to exist even if the receiver is broken. The journalist looked back at his notes. His hand was trembling. Forgive me, but why did you decide to speak about this now? Because time is running out, Einstein said quietly. I am already at the threshold, and the truth must not pass away with me. Humanity stands on the brink of the greatest discovery. The understanding that death is not the enemy, it is a transition. But if this truth becomes known too soon, it can be distorted, used for power, for manipulation. This explains my silence all these years. But I feel the era of materialism is coming to an end. Soon science and spirituality will merge. And then a path will open. At that moment, the sound of a clock was heard in the room. It struck midnight, 12 times. The journalist noted, these chimes seemed symbolic to me, as if the universe itself confirmed what was heard. You ask what awaits us on the other side? Einstein continued. The answer is both simple and complex. Everything depends on the level of awareness. Those who lived for power, pleasures, and selfishness will be tied to the lower layers of reality. Their consciousness will continue to wander among the shadows of their past. And those who sought truth, who loved, who served others, they will ascend, merge with the source, find peace, and a new beginning. I suspect that the cycle does not end. Consciousness returns again and again to learn, to grow, and to bring light into the world. The journalist lifted his head. Rebirth? Yes. Einstein nodded. But not automatic. It is a choice. Free will is the highest law. And when consciousness is ready, it can leave the cycle. Then comes what the ancients called liberation. In that moment, individuality does not die but dissolves into the ocean of light. Without fear, without pain, only love. He looked out the window into the dark night sky. We are all travelers, and death is not a wall, it is a door. Silence hung in the room. The journalist felt that if he asked even one more question, he might hear something that would change him forever. But it was impossible to resist. Professor, if this is so, why do other great minds not speak of it? Why the silence? Einstein smiled sadly. Because the truth is both too simple and too dangerous. The scientist fears being ridiculed. Religion fears losing power. Politicians fear losing control. Truth is free, and everyone who is accustomed to ruling fears freedom. Some knew Newton, Planck, Tesla, even Darwin, by the end of his life, suspected that something greater than mere chance lay behind evolution. But each of them chose silence or spoke in allegories. I myself was silent almost my entire life, Only now, as my body yields and my spirit prepares for transition, do I feel the right to speak openly." The journalist recorded every word. His heart was beating as if he stood on the edge of an abyss. Einstein continued, "Recently I reviewed my famous equation E=mc2. This formula revealed to the world the equivalence of mass and energy. But there is another level, which I have not spoken of publicly. Consciousness is also energy, a very subtle form of energy, and, by analogy, it can be transformed. When the body dies, the energy of consciousness passes into another form. In other dimensions, it is called by different names: soul, Atman, quantum of consciousness. That does not matter. What matters is that it continues." The journalist quietly asked, "Then death does not exist?" "Death exists, but not in the way people understand it. There is the death of form, the death of the body, the death of the personality connected to a particular life. But the essence is immortal. Just as energy cannot disappear, only change form, so too does consciousness not die. All who have ever lived still exist, in other levels of reality, in other states. Their thoughts, emotions, experiences, all are preserved in a vast field that some call the Akasha. Moreover, we are connected to this field constantly. Intuition, déjà vu, premonitions, these are echoes of this connection." The journalist nodded. He recalled his own moments of strange foreknowledge and sensations that could not be explained. But if this is true, he paused, searching for words, then why suffering? Illness? Loss? Einstein looked at him with a long gaze. Suffering is a school. Without the experience of pain, consciousness cannot develop. Just as muscles grow under strain, so the spirit is strengthened through trials. Each life is a lesson. Even the hardest destinies have a purpose, though the human mind cannot always understand it. When we leave this place, much will become clear, and then we will understand no one has ever truly been alone. All paths lead to unity. The clock outside struck again. Once, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. "But there is something I must add," Einstein suddenly said. His voice became firm. "In recent years, I have begun to notice a dangerous trend. Humanity is rapidly moving toward division. Technology advances, but morality lags behind. People forget their connection to each other. They see enemies instead of reflections of themselves. This is dangerous, very dangerous. If humanity does not realize its true nature, it may not survive the next century. The choice is ours. Either we accept the truth we are all one, or we destroy ourselves." He looked into the journalist's eyes. "That is why I decided to give this interview. Perhaps my last. Let my words serve as a reminder. Death is not the end. The enemy is not another person. The enemy is ignorance. Knowledge is light, and light conquers darkness." The journalist could no longer hold back his emotions. It seemed to him that he had witnessed a revelation that would change not only his destiny, but the future of the world. "Pass this on to those who are ready to hear," said Einstein, "but do not impose it. Each must come to the truth on their own. The question is not what awaits us after death. The question is how we live before it. And remember, love is the only reality that does not disappear." The journalist needed a few moments to gather his thoughts. He felt that if he did not ask the main question now, there would be no second chance. "Professor, if all this is true, is there any way to prove the continuation of consciousness after death?" Einstein leaned back in his chair. His eyes gazed somewhere beyond the room as if he were looking through time. "The scientific method requires reproducibility and measurability, but there are phenomena that cannot be repeated in a laboratory. Their proof is the very fact of their existence. Memories of past lives in children, phenomena of quantum entanglement that cannot be explained without recognizing non-material connections, cases of clinical death where people described events that occurred outside their physical bodies. Science will deny this until the very end, but denial is not refutation. Quantum physics has already broken a gap in the wall of materialism. Time is not absolute, space is not empty, matter is an illusion of density, everything is energy, everything is consciousness. In the future, scientists will create new devices. They will be able to record changes in the fields of consciousness after the death of the body. It is a matter of time. But something else is important, he added. Even if tomorrow the whole world receives undeniable proof of life after death, it will not solve the main task. The journalist frowned. What task? To change the way of life, to accept responsibility. Understanding that death is not the end should inspire a person not to flee from fear, but to elevate their actions. If everyone knew that thoughts, words, and deeds do not disappear but continue to exist in the unified field of reality, the world would change. But is humanity ready for such knowledge? That is the question. At that moment, the door of the office quietly creaked. A woman in black, the professor's housekeeper, peeked in. "Excuse me, gentlemen. It is already late. Professor, you need to rest." Einstein nodded, but his gaze did not leave the journalist. "I am tired. The body is yielding. But the spirit, it is ready to continue. If someday, in 10, 20, 100 years, someone reads this interview, let them know. I was not a mystic. I was a seeker of truth. Truth does not belong to religions. It does not belong to science. It belongs to those who seek. And now," he stood up with difficulty, "it is time to say goodbye. But this is not farewell forever. We will meet again, where all paths converge." The journalist rose, words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded. "Remember," Einstein's final phrase sounded almost a whisper, "death is awakening for those who are ready to see." He extended his hand. Their handshake was firm and warm. "Protect the light. The world is not yet ready, but the time will come." With these words, Albert Einstein turned toward the window, where the pale pre-dawn light was already appearing. The journalist stood by the door, unable to utter a word. Silence reigned in the room. Only somewhere outside, a lone thrush began to sing, heralding the beginning of a new day. Professor Einstein approached the window and looked at the brightening sky. "You know," he said quietly, "in my youth, it seemed to me that the most important thing was to discover the laws of the universe, to find a formula that would explain everything. But over the years I realized the most difficult task is to understand oneself, one's connection to others. Science can be comprehended, but the meaning of life each person discovers for themselves." He paused, then added, "We fear death because we fear losing. But there is nothing to lose. All that is true remains with us. Love, good deeds, memories. All this moves forward, even if we do not always understand how." The journalist closed his notebook. "Thank you, Professor. I will preserve your words." Einstein smiled slightly sadly but warmly. Not to be repeated, but to be reflected upon. He extended his hand. They shook hands, simply, humanly. "Live not in fear. Live in search. That is all that matters." The journalist stepped out into the morning chill. Behind him, the door slowly closed. The day began as usual, but inside, something had changed. He walked along the alley, where the first spring leaves were just budding, and thought, "It does not matter what awaits us later. What matters is what we do now." He wrote these words on the last page of his notebook and never opened it again. Thank you for staying with us and watching this video to the end. If this story made you think, support us with a like. It helps us share important reflections with even more people. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Ahead are many more stories that will help you look at familiar things from a new perspective. Write in the comments what you think about Einstein's words. We always read your thoughts and value every opinion. See you again. And remember, the truth does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. The main thing is to be able to hear it.